Physics and spirituality have been saying the same things for thousands of years. Well, you know, the Eastern traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, have been saying these things, and then modern physics is playing catch up. So I wanted to delve a bit deeper into the similarities between the two so that we can see that even modern science has proven that there's stranger things afoot than meets the eye. So when I say Eastern traditions, I mean Hinduism, I mean Buddhism, and I mean Taoism. I'm sure you have a rough idea of what they mean. These are from India, China, the Far East, and all three of them have striking similarities that I'm not going to talk about in this video, but they all seem to be saying roughly the same thing. And so we're going to use that, and we're going to compare that to modern physics. Now, modern physics, by the way, just a quick history lesson, was created, more or less, in the 1600s, about 1660, by Sir Isaac Newton. I don't even know if he was a sir, but I'm going to leave it in there. He, during a period of isolation, which is interesting, during a plague in 1665, went into, living in a farm in England, and he had all these downloads, and he got all this amazing fucking knowledge, and he created what is known as Newtonian physics, which is this idea that the universe works like cogs in a machine, and everything fits together perfectly if we could only understand the mechanics. So this is the mechanistic view of physics. He said that time and space were separate things, and that everything exists objectively in the world, regardless of who's watching it. These things are real, regardless of whether you're viewing it or not. This is just like the reality exists as it is. And I think it's pretty interesting about how, similar to a monk going into a cave and getting all these, downloads from God and, experienced all this incredible stuff, Isaac Newton similarly got his eureka moments that changed modern physics for almost 300 years when he was in a period of isolation as well. But in 1905, Einstein's theory of relativity came and whoosh, shattered all of what Newtonian physics had basically said for 250 years. He said that relativity, time and space are all relative to each other, which means we can't speak about one without speaking about the other. It means they're all linked. And that's when he came out with his famous equation, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. So energy is the same as physical matter or mass, which means that matter as well, even though we see it as solid, actually exists as energy. It exists as potentiality at the same time, which is quite a mind-blowing concept. Quantum theory then came along and shattered all of this even further by saying that if we look at things in the atomic level, the subatomic level, the actual physical properties of particles change depending on who's observing them. So that what's happening in the 3D world is dependent on whether there's an observer. So here are a few of the things that the Eastern traditions and modern physics agree on. Number one, both modern physics and Eastern spirituality agree that the universe has some sort of unity or oneness. Now in Eastern traditions, they call this God. They believe that there's this underlying presence in the universe, sometimes known as Brahman. Other people call it God. There's a few different names for it. In Taoism, they call it the Tao. But that exists, and everything else exists within that. They believe that just because it appears that we have separation, it appears that you are there watching this YouTube video and I'm here recording this YouTube video, doesn't mean that that's actually true. We are one in the same thing. We all are connected. We are all one, experiencing it ourselves individually. And in modern physics as well, there is this idea that what appears separate is actually one. Particularly in atomic physics, when it comes to waves and when it comes to particles, which is solid matter, like this, both of them appear like they are separate, but when we get to the subatomic level, we see that it depends on who's observing it. If there's someone observing it, it could either be a particle or a wave. And so that means that all these particles exist both as a wave and a particle, despite the fact that they look like they are two separate things. So this is the same idea of, duality being one. Number two, they both believe in a unified theory of space and time. Newtonian physics said that time and space were fixed. 1 hour was always going to be 1 hour. It didn't matter. Then Einstein's theory came out and said that's not true. Time is relative. If you were to travel at the speed of light, then everything around you would age centuries while you only aged a few minutes or a few months. That's why Einstein said that space and time are both exist together, and we have to call it space-time. It is something that is interwoven and interconnected. And in spiritual traditions, they've always seen them as the same. They've seen time and space as two things which are interwoven together, interconnected always. They don't see time as this external container of which all the space is contained in. They see them as this weaving dance between the two. And when it comes to science before the Big Bang, scientists are not actually even sure that in this super hot, super dense period, whether the concept of time even existed. And it's interesting because in spiritual traditions, they get you to close your eyes when you're meditating, in terms of going into a place where there's no space. You're in the black, the empty, the nothingness. And then when you're meditating, if you get into certain states, you transcend time, you forget that time exists, and that is when people say that you connect to God. So it's interesting that these kind of timeless, spaceless states that people try to get to when they're meditating or when they're doing ayahuasca is also something that people believe could have been happening before the Big Bang. And number 3, they both agree on the fact that there's this idea of the field or the void. In quantum theory, there's this idea of quantum fields, which is that particles and matter isn't just random billiard balls fucking bouncing about the table. Actually, the universe works way more like the table itself. There is this field which exists, and then the matter is just a vibratory, occurrence, a bit of energy that happens within that field. It's the idea that there are lots of interconnected fields of energy that happen all around us, like the electromagnetic field, like the Higgs field, and the gravitational field. This idea that there is an interconnected, tapestry that we are all existing within, that we are not able to see. And in Eastern traditions as well, of course, there's this idea of the void or Brahman. It is this unifying space out of which everything comes. It's also called God. It is this emptiness, this vast emptiness out of which everything emerged. And it's interesting that they both have somewhat similar ideas on this idea of a unifying field. So I hope that brightened your day up a tad and you learned a little thing or two. Have a good one. Cheers.